we made a meeting to go back up and meet with Keith Anderson. I didn't know anybody else was involved at that time. And so when I met Keith, there was a little thing called the Fayetteville Hotel or something like that. And so Keith showed up and we started talking. But I told him, I said, I need to know from you right now, why are you doing this? I said, you've got a good job. You're well respected. You're involved in a classified operation down south. I said, well, Richard told me. And he says, so why don't, he says, we use the Army strictly to steal. That was his comment to me. And I said, okay, we're off and running.
Welcome to Heroes Behind Headlines. I'm your host, Ralph Pizzulo. Our guest today is former U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, undercover agent Fred Gleffe. Fred was the ATF agent who recruited 4'9" former Green Beret Richard Flaherty of Giant Killer fame in the mid-1980s to work with him as a confidential informant on a case against Green Berets who were stealing weapons from the Special Warfare Center Armory at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. If you haven't heard the Richard Flaherty story, which is covered in the September 24th, 2023 episode of this podcast, I highly recommend it. The case against the corrupt Green Berets was only one of the many cases Fred worked on during his very active and distinguished career. Later, he served with U.S. Customs in Miami as part of a new program called Operation Exodus, in which they were trying to enforce the Arms Export Control Act for implements of war coming in and going out of the United States. During the wild cocaine years of that city, Fred ran a covert storefront import-export company that attracted drug dealers of all kinds. It's my great honor to welcome undercover agent Frederick L as today's hero behind the headlines.
Heroes Behind Headlines with Ralph Pizzulo.
Got out of high school, I had told my dad I want to go in the Army and go to Vietnam. And my dad was a captain, retired, 36 years in the military, and he got Silver Star, Bronze Star, got a Battlefield Commission, Battle of the Bulge. And he told me not to go in. He said to go to college first. And so that's what I did. And then while I was in college, I joined the New York State Parkway Police on the Palisades Interstate at Bear Mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And I did that until I graduated. And then I applied for a warrant commission in the Army. And I went into the Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division, and as a special agent. And I stayed there at Fort Bragg for about 4 years. And from there, when I got out of the service, I went back to graduate school at the University of South Carolina. And then I got an offer from ATF and from Secret Service back in 1978 to go back in. And so I decided to go to ATF because I worked with those guys a lot when I was at Fort Bragg. And so I always liked what they did. And so I went with ATF and was stationed in Miami and stayed down there for about 12 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I was there during the drug wars in 79, 80, 81. Stayed down there. I did the Giant Killer, which Dave Yatsik did the book and the documentary.
Yeah.
And in 87, I left ATF for various reasons, but mainly because of the that Green Beret case that I just mentioned, the Giant Killer. We could have gone a long way in that case, and I just didn't feel like that ATF wanted to just get it over with and not step on anybody's toes. So I left, and I went to U.S. Customs in Miami, and they had just started a new program called Operation Exodus, in which they were trying to enforce the Arms Export Control Act for implements of war coming in and out of the United States.
Okay.
And at that time, they had started a covert storefront, which was an import-export company, which I ran for about 3 years. And I was an export broker. And so we went all over the place. We went all over the world catching bad guys.
Okay. Let's go back to ATF.
Okay.
Can you just tell our viewers a little bit about ATF? Because I know they have a long history, what they do. And then let's get into the ATF case first.
When I first started, it was ATF was under the Treasury Department.
Right.
And we, back in the old days, it was IRS, ATU, or I call it tax unit. And then it turned into ATF back in, I believe, in the early 70s, maybe. And so ATF enforces all the gun laws, all the explosive laws, and all the tobacco laws in the United States. That always kind of intrigued me, especially the explosives and stuff like that. So that's why it kind of geared toward that.
Yeah.
And when I went to Miami, I always had a hankering to do undercover work. Now, most times you will see that an undercover agent doesn't necessarily be the case agent.
Yeah.
Because the case agent is the guy that runs the case.
Right.
Now, in my particular thing, I always was a case agent too, because I always enjoyed not the paperwork, but the overall feeling of control of my case.
Yeah, like the strategy of it and so on.
Yeah, and where you're going with it, and
yeah.
and the legalities, how you're going to get it to court and stuff like that.
Right.
And so that's what I did.
Okay.
And so I did that for quite a while. Did quite a few cases in Miami. Had a lot of informants.
You were concentrated mostly on firearms?
Firearms and explosives, yes.
Okay. And what would you say is the percentage of cases between the three?
Oh, I would say probably 90-30, maybe.
Okay.
I did a lot of firearms cases, and I did about 30% were explosive cases, buying controlled substances like hand grenades, Claymore landmines, laws rockets, all that type of stuff.
And this is stuff that's coming into the country or leaving the country?
A lot of this stuff was when I went to customs. Now that I was leaving the country.
Yeah.
But when I was with ATF, it was stuff that was inside the United States for the most part.
Okay.
Stolen off the military bases. Some people just they build explosives, they build handguns, they build machine guns.
Wow.
And so most of that stuff is local.
And they build it and sell it.
And they build it and sell it.
Okay.
Especially in Miami. You had people in Miami that were making assassination kits for Mac 11s.
Wow.
With a silencer, Ruger 22 silenced pistols, which was the mob gun. The mobs loved to use the 22 Ruger.
Yeah.
The decibel level was about 30 or 31%, decibels, and that you could rarely hear it.
Really? Wow.
So that's where I got interested.
And I bet in those days the customers were mainly drug dealers.
All drug dealers. I mean, you get a couple of guys like ex-military guys that wanted to sell stuff and things like that, but mainly it was the drug dealers in Miami during the drug wars.
Okay, so let's get into the giant killer case, Richard Flaherty.
I had known about Flaherty for a couple of years that he had been involved in the sale of some silencers and was caught with, I forget, some cocaine. I forget how much, maybe a couple kilos of cocaine.
Standing 4'9", Richard J. Flaherty was the most unconventional man to ever serve in the U.S. military, much less an elite unit like the Green Berets. In fact, he had to get a congressional waiver to enlist in the Army in the first place. Mocked and bullied at boot camp, Richard overcame one physical and psychological obstacle after another. He eventually became a captain, led men in combat, and earned a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts. Though highly decorated and wanting to pursue a career in the military, Richard Flaherty fell victim to the reduction in force cuts that took place following the Vietnam War, when the U.S. Army was roughly halved from almost 1.6 million soldiers in 1968 at the peak of the war to about 800,000 in 1973. Feeling betrayed by his own government and suffering from the effects of severe trauma, Richard had a hard time adjusting to civilian life. After several failed businesses and drinking heavily, he ended up living on the streets.
And when they arrested him, I was not the arresting agent or anything else like that, but I knew about the case.
Yeah.
And so a couple of years went by, and I had inquired about whatever happened to Flaherty with the agent that arrested him. I don't want to mention any names, okay?
Yeah.
But he said that he's not working, and we're getting ready. U.S. attorney called me, and we're going to go ahead and indict him. And I said, well, let me call the guy and see if he's available. So I called Richard on the phone one afternoon, and I said, Richard, what's going on? They're getting ready to indict you. And he said, what? What for? I said, well, because you haven't done anything. You said you want to cooperate, but you haven't done it. He says, I'm an ex-military guy. When somebody tells me to stand still, that's what I do.
Yeah.
I don't go out looking for anything. I don't do anything. And so I'm not saying it was the control agent's, problem.
Right.
But he never checked back with him. I guess that's what it was.
Right. So basically what happened was Richard was arrested selling silencers, you said,
Right.
and a small amount of cocaine, and he offered to cooperate with law enforcement.
He offered to cooperate with the government.
But they never called him.
They never contacted. They just said, hold still and we'll get back to you. And they never did.
Yeah.
And so they got ready to indict him. And on I forget what it was, maybe a Thursday or Friday, I called him and I said, would you want to work with me? And he said, absolutely. I said, God, I'm from Fort Bragg. I know Fort Bragg.
Yeah.
I said, I understand you were up there and as in capacity with the Army Special Forces. And he said, yeah. He says, and I have some good contacts up there that I think we can do some good.
Uh-huh.
I told him also that, if we do this thing, I want you to make a phone call to one of the bad guys, a guy by the name of Keith Anderson.
Yeah.
And so, and I says, but I'm going to ask him some questions when I get there. And because all my friends are former SF guys.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of friends. And after Vietnam, a lot of SF guys came into Army CID because there's nothing to do. There's no mission for them.
Yeah.
So I said, so I'm not really cool about doing this thing if it doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
So I had Richard call Keith on Sunday afternoon. And on the phone, Keith always called him Captain Flaherty. Captain Flaherty, how you doing?
Yeah.
And so, a lot of respect for him, okay, from these guys.
Yeah.
And so we made a meeting to go back up and meet with Keith Anderson. I didn't know anybody else was involved at that time.
Yeah.
And so when I met Keith, there was a little thing called the Fayetteville Hotel or something like that. And so Keith showed up and we started talking. But I told him, I said, I need to know from you right now, why are you doing this? I said, you've got a good job.
Yeah.
You're well respected. You're involved in a classified operation down south.
Yeah.
I said, well, Richard told me. And he says, so why you doing? He says, we use the Army strictly to steal. That was his comment to me.
Wow.
And I said, okay, we're off and running.
This is a guy who's still in Special Forces.
Right. He was D8.
And he was stealing stuff from the armory at Fort Bragg and selling it.
He was stealing whatever they could get their hands on.
Yeah.
They were stealing, uniforms. They were stealing, what they call TA-50 gear, which is all the gear that's assigned to a new recruit coming in for going out to do jumping and all this other stuff. Anything that they could get their hands on. And they even he told me that same night that they had formed a corporation, him and his partners.
Wow.
And they had a warehouse out, a small warehouse, which is a large warehouse out in Spring Lake, North Carolina, which is right on the other side of Fort Bragg.
Uh-huh.
And he said, one of these days, if things work, we'll take you out there and show it to you.
Wow. And
so that night, I says, all right, well, let's go. So we came up with a lot of code signs, like bullets were going to be pencils, apples were going to be hand grenades, Claymore landmines were going to be big books, stuff like that. So we came up with a whole vernacular. And I said, how long can it be till you get us something? And he said, well, I've got stuff out in my truck right now.
Huh.
And so he went out to he had a VW bus.
Yeah.
And he carried back in a big, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's a parachute kit bag. It's a real big, heavy canvas bag that they carry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
They pack their stuff in. And so we opened it up. And I think that night we got like a couple thousand yards of dead cord.
Wow.
Which is highly explosive.
Yeah.
Timers. We got C4, about 196 pounds of C4.
Now, Fred, how were you representing yourself? As a buyer?
Yeah, Richard had told them that I looked a lot different, obviously, but back then I was a drug dealer, actually an arms dealer.
Yeah.
That connections with the cartel.
Okay.
And that if they wanted to do guns for drugs or explosives for drugs, I was willing to try to make those connections for them.
Wow. He didn't try to hide his identity at all.
No, not at all. He walked in. He was very, very suspicious now, and he was carrying a gun.
Yeah.
And I saw a gun in his waistband, and so Flaherty was there, and he just trusted Flaherty 100%.
Uh-huh.
And so Flaherty was the one who kept saying, well, we need this stuff tonight. Can you get the stuff tonight? So I had, I think, maybe $2,500 on me.
Yeah.
And I said, this is all I've got. And no, his eyes just lit up because he said, oh, that's more than enough. That's more than enough.
Wow.
And so I ended up giving $2,500 for that stuff that night.
Yeah.
And then we're off and running.
Yeah. Now, at the time, was Flaherty living on the streets? Did you know where he was living?
No, I'd set Richard up to work for the post office.
Oh, okay.
He had a job with the post office, which now from week to week we can still be there because he was continually irritating everybody that he talked to. Because you got to understand, and also when he got drunk,
yeah.
I mean, he turned into a little fire plug.
Yeah.
And wanted to fight everybody. So we got up there, and it was one of these type of things where he and I just hit it off. I mean, Flaherty and I just hit it off. I didn't trust him. I never trusted an informant to that stage, but I did trust him as far as walking in a room, not knowing anybody in there, and him taking over and saying, "Hey, this guy's a cool guy."
Yeah.
My stance was, I was over in Charlotte trying to collect money from a guy. He owed me about $100,000. And so I was trying to collect money. So Richard was with me, and he said, "Hey, I got these guys at Fort Bragg. You want to go meet them?"
Yeah.
That's how I got in.
Okay.
He had a Silver Star, Bronze Star, and he had 4 Purple Hearts.
Wow.
So I had a lot of respect for the guy also, but I also knew he's also troubled.
Yeah.
Because this was a guy that the military never should have riffed, and rift means reduction in force.
Yeah.
And so this is one guy that if he'd stayed in the military, who knows where he would have gone.
Yeah.
But they ripped him, and he got out, and he just was wandering.
Yeah.
He lived under a palm tree down in Aventura, Florida for about 18 years.
Wow.
And this is after I met him, and this was later. And when I met him, he was still working in at the post office and had an apartment.
But drinking heavily and a troubled guy.
Yeah. And always paranoid, always thinking somebody was over the shoulder looking at him, agency guys or whatever.
Yeah.
Richard was always paranoid.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So how did the case develop from that initial meeting?
Well, I met Keith several more times, and he kept talking about his partners. And so they had a corporation by the name of CMAG,
mm-hmm.
and it stood for Carlisle, Anderson, Martinez, and I can't forget what the last guy's name was. But yeah, Martinez was their company commander in 7th Special Forces.
Wow.
And so Carlisle was a high-ranking NCO, I believe, is an E8 or E9, which is a sergeant major or first sergeant.
Yeah.
But my problem is that Anderson told me that Carlisle was to be trusted, but he was a former military investigator at Fort Bragg.
Huh.
And so what they call MPI, which is a military police investigator, which is different from CID. We did felony stuff, and they did all the misdemeanor stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very concerned because, I dealt with these guys almost daily,
yeah.
Going back and forth and taking cases. So the night that I met Carlisle at the same hotel, he was coming over, there's a knock at the door. Well, I went to the door, and I had my gun in my waistband, and I took it and put it behind me. And because, if he'd recognized me, I knew they were both carrying guns.
Yeah.
And so it would have been all over. But he walked in, he shook my hand, acted like he never knew me. And so we were off and running.
Yeah.
And Carlisle was very, very astute. He was, you could tell he was the brains.
Right.
And Keith was the brawn.
Right. This was really dangerous for you because basically this is internal, right?
Right. This is something I wasn't quite sure about.
Yeah. And
the handlers were outside, and these guys were, these guys were nobody to mess with.
Yeah.
I mean, they had both been in Vietnam. They ran the green light program over there, which was for a classified operation type of thing.
Yeah.
And then they when they came back here, they just continued to steal.
Yeah.
And they actually started a corporation before I even came on the scene.
Incredible. Who were their clients? Did you know?
I never asked, and they never told me, but they just said that they could move stuff fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And then one night I actually was invited to go out to the myself and another Flaherty went out to the warehouse in Spring Lake, and it was a huge warehouse, and it was full of military property.
Wow.
Pallets on pallets. And they had a whole pallet of blank ammunition, 5.56, which is the rounds that go into M16.
Yeah.
And they wanted to know if I wanted that cheap for like $10,000. And so, but I didn't have any reason to buy anything like that. So I said, no, not really. But I started buying Claymore landmines off these guys, hand grenades, more C4, dead cord, anything that I could get my hands on, Laws rockets, all that type of stuff.
And did they ever disclose how they stole this stuff?
The way that we designed the plan was that these guys were running a classified operation down outside of Tegucigalpa, Honduras.
Uh-huh.
And they said it's going to be real easy for us because we can get anything we want from the ammo supply point with the proper signatures on a hand receipt. And they put on special operation outside CONUS, which is continental United States.
Right.
A residue was non-returnable, and that means that once it went out the door, it didn't have to come back.
Yeah.
And so we started doing that, and so I'd start get these hand receipts that were signed by various people inside the 7th Special Forces group, and so we would. Everywhere that they went, I would meet them somewhere. One time, they were flying a Special Forces dive team into Key West.
Uh-huh.
And so Keith called me on the phone, and he says, "Look, we'll meet you at the Naval Weapons Station or the Naval Air Station down there in Key West."
Yeah.
So I went up to the gate, and they opened it up. I don't know who opened it up, whatever, but I drove my truck in there, and I went up to the back of the C-130, and I loaded my truck up with ordnance. And I was getting about 5.5 tons of ordnance. So there was quite a bit.
Yeah.
Then I'd drive back out, and then that C-130 would pick up the remaining SF scuba team that just got certified and flying back to Fort Bragg.
Yeah.
And we did that several times. I met these guys in Jacksonville. But I guess what my point is, Ralph, is that they gave me access to all the classified passwords for their ammo supply point.
Wow.
And they gave me the name of an SF guy with 10th Group that would take a lot of the heat off of anything going through Fort Bragg. So I was going through 10th Group out there to order stuff through him.
Wow.
And so later on, after Carlisle became, fairly confident with me that I could get things done, they always wanted the dope. They always wanted, get cocaine, get this guy. I always got, put them off and kept paying him because money always talks to begin with. But sooner or later, you got to, as they say, you got to do it or get off the throne,
Right.
And so it's one of these type of things where I kept putting them off. And I met him, I met Anderson more than did Carlisle because Carlisle was the brains, you could tell.
Yeah.
And he kind of teeth out there up front.
And they wanted drugs. They wanted to exchange drugs for this.
Carlisle and Anderson both told me that in a meeting in Fort Bragg that they wanted to establish an independent cocaine network in Fort Bragg.
Wow.
And they wanted to eliminate all the competition. And so that's when they told me, because I asked him a question, well, how do you eliminate the competition? He says, well, we don't shoot anybody.
Yeah.
He said, what we do is we use ketamine hydrochloride. And he said, what we do is we hold a person down and we inject it with ketamine in the common carotid artery. They totally pass out. And he said, then we push them under a tub of water. And as they're waking up, they drown.
Ironically, this is the same way actor and comedian Matthew Perry died recently when he was found dead in his hot tub on October 28, 2023 in Los Angeles. An autopsy report released by the Los Angeles Coroner's Office blamed the acute effects of ketamine. First synthesized in the early 1960s and securing FDA approval for medical use in the U.S. in 1970, ketamine was first deployed as a general anesthetic in battlefield medicine and surgeries during the Vietnam War, and later as an effective animal tranquilizer. With its fast action and relatively low toxicity, the drug soon supplanted penicillin, or PCP, as the popular emergency anesthetic. But like PCP, ketamine also spread through the illicit underground, where it remains a popular drug, especially in the UK and increasingly in the US, where seizures of the drug have increased 349% in the past 5 years.
Guys were in uniform, and they had all the cabbage on their stuff, and they look good.
Yeah.
And the jury was mainly consisted of retired military people that are retired in West Palm Beach.
Sure.
And so, but everything was real quiet, and I had a Niagara tape recorder, which is a small tape recorder it's a very good tape recorder for taping. And so when I'm up there testifying and I start talking about how these guys told me how to kill a person, the whole jury just stopped and says, wait a minute, these guys, they're wearing a uniform, but yet they're talking about killing people.
Yeah.
And it went on and on and on. And it was a kind of poignant point of the trial because, it was a classified trial to begin with because these guys, their whole contention was they thought this was a CIA operation outside CONUS and they were being recruited to do it. And that was always just a bunch
of bull. Yeah.
And a CIPA hearing is a Classified Information Procedures Act hearing,
in
which they, everybody in the courtroom, they close it off. Everybody in the courtroom is going to have a top secret clearance. And then we bring the witnesses in and they certify, exactly how the whole operation orchestrates from the very start and had nothing to do with what they did. Nothing. I mean, I never would have met these guys first.
Yeah, of course.
If I was an operator, I would, but they always contended that we were CIA people.
Yeah.
And that this was a CIA operation from the very start.
That was their defense.
That was their defense.
Wow. These are military special forces guys, and they're basically stealing weapons from Fort Bragg.
From Fort Bragg and Fort Devens.
And killing people who were their rivals, or some of the people they killed, I would imagine, were active military personnel as well.
Whoever got their way, that is what they told me. And I said, well, we're not going to get to that stage yet. I said, I want to make sure that you guys are for real and you can give me what I need. And then once I get what I need, then I'm going to get you what you need.
Yeah.
And they kept asking about the guy that was out in Charlotte that owed me money. And it came to the point where I had to do something. And so we set up some cameras out there and we put an old seized vehicle out there. I said, look, I don't want to kill the guy, but I want to scare him.
Yeah.
And so he gets up there and he says, all right, well, So Carlisle is calls me one morning, and he says, "Look, I want you to hear something." So he holds up the phone. It was a big boom. Well, later on, we found out that they had a creepy crawler guy that was a former state, might have been even an active state trooper out of Alabama, which Carlisle had been a state trooper in Alabama before he went in the military.
Yeah.
And so it's a guy that he uses for a lot of his black bag justice stuff. And so anyhow, and I said, so I paid him $2,500 to hire the guy, and then $2,500 when the deal was done.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether or not they ever did it, I mean, I don't know. And what the boom was, I don't know. But it sounded like they were trying to scare him. So
yeah. And who was this guy? The guy you set up to be your contact?
No, that was all fictitious. That was the guy. That was my storyline to get up there.
Right.
And I said, because they kept asking me about him, I said, let's go get this $100,000.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't want to, I just want to scare the guy. I don't want to kill the guy.
Okay.
And so that's how the whole thing went.
Okay.
And so once they got to $5,000, they were happy and then never came back up again.
Wow. But they had no qualms about blowing somebody up. No problem at all.
No.
For $5,000.
They said whoever got in their way, whether it be, the brothers at Fort Bragg or anybody else, they were going to take over.
Wow.
And so it got to the point where I had to produce something also.
Yeah.
And so we decided that let's go with the munitions and everything else to begin with. Now, I never bought any guns from these guys. It was always explosives.
Yeah.
And because that was the easiest thing for them to get out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, once the paperwork was signed for, special op outside CONUS, resident or non-returnable, then it was clear sailing.
And Fred, how far up the chain of command do you think this went?
I don't know. We had there was an 06, which was a colonel.
Yeah.
We know that the captain was in it. The guy's name was Martinez. We never got him indicted because he never came forward.
Mm-hmm.
And when these two guys were arrested, they never cooperated. And we were kind of hoping that they would, but then they came up with the CIA defense.
Yeah.
And it just never floated.
Yeah.
This was never an operation. And even the way they go about it, we had special ops guys from the military come in that run the program for between the military and the agency.
Yeah.
And they came in and said it never would have been done this way.
Right.
And so it was just these guys were looking to
make money.
Yeah. So as we went on, Ralph, I also met another guy. His name was Oscar Alvarez. And Oscar Alvarez, his father was a former exiled minister of defense for Honduras.
Wow.
And so I met Carlos several times, Oscar, and he was up there for special forces training at their foreign school for the Q school to be certified.
Right.
And he was a very nice guy, but he sat there for a couple hours and told us about how he could help with the drug trade. He said, I can get in, I can set up all the transportation routes. He said we already got a classified camp that we're using right now, and they're flying in now. They were C-130s. He said, so we can do the whole thing. Yeah. And so we once everything went down, there was not he was right in the middle of it, but he knew better than to get involved. So he stayed on the side, and we never got him. And I heard he's in the United States now. So good for him.
Yeah. Yeah. So they really wanted to get into the drug trade. That was sort of their object with you.
Yeah. They really wanted to do it.
And so they're saying, we have the whole apparatus. We have the network to get it into the United States. We just need your help to distribute it.
And it came to the point where I had to introduce another agent that was a Spanish speaker, that Agent Eddie, and he looked the part, boy.
Yeah.
Oh, we all looked the part.
Yeah.
But he really looked the part, and he came in and he was boasting and typical, druggy type of thing that I can do anything, just make sure that everything's there. And we actually gave Anderson 2 kilos of fake cocaine, which looks exactly like it, tests everything else like that, but you just can't snort it. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up giving it to him at the end, and that's when we busted everybody.
In the end, how many people were arrested?
We arrested Carlisle and Anderson, and then the other guys were the military took care of. They were either they had Article 15 hearings or whatever, but we never really got outside these guys.
Article 15s are considered non-judicial punishment under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Article 15s are a mechanism that allow the chain of command to punish a soldier for offenses under the Uniform Code of Military Justice without formally charging him or her at a court-martial. What's relevant in this case is that most soldiers accept the Article 15 process because it protects them from having a criminal record. In other words, it's the military's way of dealing with disciplinary problems internally.
They didn't want to share the wealth type of thing. They wanted to get all the money. And the more people you introduce, the more money you got to pay.
And how did the military treat it? Did they want it kept quiet?
The military did not like it.
Yeah,
no,
I bet
when
not.
we went up there with the U.S. attorney and everything else like that, and I also had to go testify to a couple of U.S. senators about the holes in the ammo supply agency at the military in general.
Yeah.
And they were, you're full. And then I started telling these classified passwords that I had to get into the system.
Yeah.
I told them about the people that I had met, supply sergeants that were available to help me help with them, and they were just amazed, but they didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And I think that we could have gone so much farther in that case.
Sure.
Had they not just wanted to do the buy bust.
Sure, because as you point out, like all those people who had given you passwords, who had let you onto bases, somehow they were getting paid off too. They weren't just doing this.
Now I'm a civilian and I'm driving on to a military installation down at Key West.
Yeah.
And I'm a civilian in a civilian truck.
Yeah.
So that shows you right there.
Yeah. So this is obviously like a widespread problem.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted to go into it deeper.
That's correct. I tell you what happened in that is after David called me and he had befriended Flaherty for 15 years.
Yeah.
And Flaherty opened up one day and said, I used to be a Greenberry captain. And nobody believed him. He took him to a storage locker and boom, everything was there.
Yeah.
And he said, call this guy Fred Gleffe up and so-and-so. And he says, he'll vouch for me.
Yeah.
So when I talked to David, he said, look, I'd like to come up and interview you or come down here. And I said, I'm not going to go anywhere. He said, just if you want to come up here, fine.
Yeah.
But then 2 or 3 days later, he called me on the phone and he says, Richard's dead.
Yeah.
And I said, what? Richard's dead?
Yeah.
He said, yeah, he got hit in a hit and run last night. And he said he laid in the ditch for 4 hours before he died. And so, it was one of these type of things where I was looking forward to seeing Richard again because, but I got him out of more trouble than you ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd get these phone calls years later.
Yeah.
I get a phone call from New Orleans police department. Said, this guy Flaherty?
Yeah.
I said, don't tell me. He got in a bar, he got drunk, and he punched out several people. He said, yeah. But he said he'll be the best informant you ever had. He can get anybody.
Yeah.
And so I get several of those phone calls.
Yeah.
And then I had to go down to the post office because he had a complaint file about an inch thick.
He'd never show up. Yeah.
A homophobe.
Yeah.
You name it. He was just it. But some of the stuff in the documentary just didn't make sense to me. Where he said he had a Uzi, pointed toward the front door, and that's what his I think his cousin said, but I never saw any of that.
And what did you make of all the stuff about these plane tickets to Kuwait and Venezuela and stuff like that?
Well, it's like on a documentary, and myself and the guy that was Tonto Peranto, I forget his name now.
Yeah, right.
We both said the same thing. I said, where's the money? I mean, there's no money trail anywhere.
Yeah.
Unless Richard. And then David had that other photo, and all those special ops guys stand in front of that helicopter, and that's Flaherty.
Yeah.
But his face is blacked out.
Yeah.
But he's the only little short 4'9" guy standing there.
He sticks out. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So maybe he had a numbered account somewhere in Cayman Islands or something like that.
And I think David didn't have access to all. I'm quite sure that if Flaherty had gone to work for the thieves, they would have found out everything.
Yeah.
But he didn't. I mean, he was working local and he working with us and stuff like that. But I don't think we really had the access to all of this. But he'd been all the right countries, Venezuela, Iran, Iraq.
Yeah.
All the right places.
Yeah. But there's all kinds of private contracting firms and so on and so forth. He could have been doing anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a troubled guy, definitely.
Oh, tremendously.
Yeah.
And I'd have to go to the postmaster and plead with him once every couple of weeks to keep him on the job. And finally said, we can't keep him anymore. He's
Yeah.
He said he can't walk around here and not show up and all sorts of stuff. I was always having to pay him money, but I said, give me something at all.
Yeah.
And I paid him pretty well.
Yeah.
So he had enough to live on, but nothing like if he went to those countries as a private merc, he probably made some bucks.
Yeah, he must have. I
had done a lot of cases with ATF, a lot of good cases, had a lot of good friends, but I just made the career decision to go over to Customs, and because they wanted me over there. They got a brand new program, and we were very successful. I ran an operation called Operation Stinger, in which we had a storefront operation, and we bought everything from C-130 aircrafts to Hawk missile batteries. We laundered money. Whatever we could do, we did, and it was very successful operation. I'd say maybe over $100 million in seizures.
Wow!
In 18 months.
In 18 months.
Yeah, in 18 months.
How did you set that up, Fred?
When I came into Customs, there was an agent that was already doing the background stuff, and they asked me if I would come over and run it because they knew my background with ATF, and so I said, yeah, I'll go run it.
This was going to be like a storefront, like what you said, import-export business?
Yeah, import-export business, and I was an import-export broker.
Okay.
And it got so good that we actually hired another guy to do the legitimate business side of our business because we were getting so much business, and then we would do the illegitimate side. You got to understand, Ralph, in Miami back in those days, even in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I mean, there's bad guys on every corner.
Yeah.
And the thing with it was, a lot of times, we may mesh with another agency, but we all worked together, and we all did it because for the common good, and we worked great.
Yeah.
And so it worked out.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing that we ran was just a really top-notch operation. I mean, we'd bring the bad guys in. I went to the DERMA, which is the defense reutilization area where they get rid of all the military stuff that the military doesn't use anymore.
Yeah.
And actually filled my whole warehouse full of military property. And so when the bad guys would come in, I mean, I had Stinger missiles in there. I had Laws rockets. I had, but they're all inert. Everything I had was because it was going to be sold somewhere else.
Yeah.
And we got some Saudi Arabians in there one time, and they just loved the place. So they said, what can we have? But obviously we couldn't give them anything.
Yeah.
But it was just for show.
Yeah.
But it was a first class operation.
Wow. So how did it work?
Most times on the illegitimate side, you'd always have an informant.
Yeah.
Informant would hook up with somebody, and they said, "Hey, look, we're looking for this, we're looking for that." And with customs, it wasn't so much guns and ammunition as it was high technology.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't. Like one time we met Bulgarians over in Milan, Italy, and they wanted what they call a klystron tube, and this is a high capacity condenser that goes into Hawk missile, batteries, any other type of anti-aircraft type of thing. And they're about $60,000 a piece. And so, we meet those guys for that. We meet other guys for computers, for high level computers. And I'm going to, talk to you about that if you that one case I was telling you about.
Sure.
But we did a lot. We did a lot with customs, before I left. The one case I want to talk about real quick is, I don't know if anybody remembers, but way back there was a pilot of a Cessna 182 that flew all the way in and landed in Moscow Square.
I remember that. Yeah, yeah.
And he was arrested and everything else as a spy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, we had an informant that was a captain of a NATO ammunition ship that was delivering ammunition every month to NATO in the Netherlands, in The Hague. And so he was standing there on the dock, and these two guys approached him, and they said, "Oh, can you give us an information about someone who wants to get computers out of the United States?" And he says, "Look, I don't do that." I said, "But I can hook you up," because he knew about us.
Yeah.
But I can hook you up to the right people. So next thing we know is we get a phone call from this guy from Belgium, and he says, "Look, we're interested in getting computers to my end product, to my end user."
Yeah.
And so anyhow, we made arrangements, and we met. This guy's name was Eddie Hawk.
Oh, Eddie Hawk. Yeah, I've heard of Eddie Hawk. Yeah, famous guy.
Eddie shows up at our door, and Eddie and I hit it off immediately. And I think I told you before that Eddie was a Mensa guy.
Yeah.
He spoke several languages. He was always very business, very likable guy.
Yeah.
And he just basically said, "Look, I am the main procurement officer for the Soviet Union."
Wow.
And it says anything that comes in or out of the Soviet Union, I get a piece of.
Yeah.
And so I said, what happened was, whenever Russ came in and landed that plane, the Soviets got all nervous that their 11 time zones needed to be protected.
Yeah. So
they wanted to make a complete network of IBM 360s, VAX 8800, and all the way up to a Cray 1, I think it is, supercomputer, in order to supply, the radar systems for all the whole Soviet Union.
To coordinate everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And we got off on that, and it was pretty cool, because when we finally arrested Eddie, I think it was the first time that I've ever heard of. I think that Keith Preggert, one of my bosses, told me that a person was actually sentenced to the custody of the U.S. Customs Service. And so he was sent to us for 2 years. And Eddie and I worked together in our covert. And Eddie was so cool, because we had phones set up in this one room, this phone room. And it was different countries and stuff like that. And it would ring, and it would pick it up, and Eddie would start speaking fluently in that language.
Wow.
I mean, it was really incredible.
So you arrest Eddie,
right?
And they turn him over to customs,
right? And
you use him as an informant, basically.
Yeah, we debriefed Eddie for almost 3 weeks. But the problem was, he was at the MCI, which is a Metropolitan Correctional Institute down in Miami. So we had to go down there and get him into a separate room. And that's when he said, "We got a lot of companies over here that I've already given deposits to, to bring in computers." And we actually provided a 3060 IBM computer, a 360 computer. We had the NSA people come down, and they painted the motherboard for us, so that this thing would work fine. And then after 30 days, it just, X's and O's.
Yeah.
And so So we went ahead and did that just to make sure it didn't work. We dropped it off the back of the truck, but just to make sure. But anyhow, but they loved us, and they couldn't wait to get more and more and more. And so
wow.
So finally, we had a bunch of companies over here that were willing to sell out the U.S.
Jeez.
To go to Russia. So
wow.
We lined them all up, and we did them one at a time, and we ended up shipping a supercomputer up to Charleston, South Carolina. And we ended up taking off the company up here in various companies around the country, but it worked out real good.
Yeah.
And Eddie went back. Eddie fulfilled his duty, and Eddie and I became good friends. I mean, I will tell you right now, because I knew he got in trouble, and matter of fact, I met him at his house when I went over to Belgium. A beautiful home, 27,000 square foot home with all the all kinds of classic cars. I said, Eddie, you did pretty well for yourself.
Yeah.
He said, yeah. He said, but I'm not doing that anymore. He says, I promise you. So I said, all right, well, whatever. It's because you are. We'll catch you again. And so
he's a legend. I mean, were you working with DEA on that operation? Because I know they were involved with him with
the Special Investigations Unit.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, never did that in Miami, because Miami was all drugs, and Eddie was just like he was dealing everything but drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't do drugs at all.
Yeah.
But everything that came in and out, he was the main procurement officer for the Soviets.
Wow. What was his nationality?
He was a Belgian. He was from a small town in Belgium. And I had heard, I never found out for sure, but I heard that the Bulgarians, the guys that we had arrested for the Klystron tube, they actually caught up with him and they killed him, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
Because I asked Eddie one time, I said, Eddie, you got your same phone number.
Yeah.
Why do you keep your same phone number for? He said, over here, it takes a year to get your phone number changed.
Wow.
He said, because everything is government owned and it all goes through the government.
Yeah.
And so I had heard that. I don't know if that's true or not, but one of the agents in Miami with customs told me that he had been killed by the Bulgarians. So whether or not, and it was just a really, really fine fellow.
The man Fred is referring to, Eddie Garandis Haak, was a Dutch national who was arrested on December 14, 1988, after he paid $50,000 in Swiss francs to U.S. undercover agents. He was charged with conspiring to illegally export a Digital Equipment Corporation VAX 8800 computer from the United States to Bulgaria. Haak later turned informant and helped break up a high-tech smuggling network spanning 6 American cities and 8 foreign countries based in Belgium. It sought U.S. computers to bolster the Soviet air defense system after a West German pilot landed in Moscow's Red Square on a lark. Based on information provided by Eddie Haak, 5 people and 2 corporations were indicted by a federal grand jury in a smuggling case involving $1.8 million worth of sensitive computer equipment. So there were no lack of companies here willing to do business.
No, and that was Exodus in general. If you look at the U.S. Exodus program, we were making arrests and seizures all over the country, and working with our foreign counterparts overseas, and making big huge seizures over there.
Yeah,
I mean it just and the big thing was, like, you get a country like Iran. Yeah, and as soon as the Shah was overrun, then we put all the sanctions on them, and so they can't get anything. Right. Well, they've got 114 F-14 Tomcats. Yeah, and they can't get parts, so they start coming over here looking for parts. Yeah, and then that's the way the whole thing starts. Yeah, and that's in country after country where there's sanctions. Those procurement officers will come back to the United States looking for stuff.
Right, and there's no shortage of companies here that are willing to skirt the sanctions and break laws here to make some money, and they're big companies.
Right. And that brings up another case that I worked on, the David Tompkins case. Mm-hmm. And when I was working with Customs again, I was called. I had transferred out of Miami, but I was called by the Miami agents. They asked me would I do an undercover working on some military soldier fortune type of guys that were out of London, and they were looking to come over to the United States to do some stuff. And so I met with the informant. I don't want to say anything about the informant because he's still very active, but I just want to say that. We hooked up with him, and he hooked me up with David and 2 of his cohorts in the Intercontinental Hotel in Miami, and we started talking back and forth. And David was a stand-up guy. I mean, he was you could tell he'd been around. Yeah. And he had a group of mercenaries. He said that that are trying to do something down in South America that he's not going to tell me anything about, but can you provide an airplane?
David Tompkins has been described as a man with an almost unquenchable thirst for adventure. Born in Hampshire, England, he became an expert in blowing open safes in Britain and France as a young man, even breaking into the safe of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. After spending most of the 60s in and out of jail, he was offered the chance to fight as a mercenary during the 1970s in one of Africa's bloodiest civil wars in Angola. During the 80s, this suave, blonde-haired mercenary branched out into the arms trade, supplying weapons to various military forces. In the summer of 1988, he was recruited to kill the head of the notorious Medellin cartel, Pablo Escobar. After that plot failed spectacularly, a rival Colombian cartel hired Thompson to blow up Pablo Escobar, who was now staying in a specially built prison. Tompkins planned to buy an A-37 Dragonfly light attack aircraft and bomb the prison.
I said, well, what type of airplane? Because you heard that I was an airplane. I came off as being an airplane broker.
Yeah.
I actually had to go to school for it a little bit to learn different things about different airplanes.
Uh-huh.
But I went over there and I said, yeah, what are you looking for? He said, we're looking for a low-level Cessna jet, and it's called a Dragonfly.
Mm-hmm.
And and the Dragonfly was used in Vietnam for low-level bombing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back during Vietnam. And so he said, we've been looking for over a year for one of these. If you can do it, I've heard good things about you from the informant that you've delivered things for him before. And the informant was caught up with a load of cocaine coming in,
mm-hmm.
and he decided to cooperate. That's the only reason why he was cooperating.
Yeah.
And he was one to turn us on to David.
Just to review, David is a former Special Forces guy or like SAS guy,
and he turned into a merc.
Yeah,
a mercenary, and he started his own company.
Yeah,
and then he started telling me this. We tried to do an operation on this particular target about 4 or 5 years ago, and he says, but we one of the helicopters crashed into the side of the mountain, and several guys were killed and stuff like that. So we didn't do it. So I started doing some research and found out that he had in fact tried to kill Mario Escobar way back with a special forces team from all over, his mercs from all over the country that came in.
Right.
I want to say there might have been as many as 12 guys and 2 helicopters, and they knew where Escobar was, and he was taking a back road. They knew what car he was in.
Yeah.
But the thing went belly up like right away.
So who are they doing this for? They must have been hired by somebody to take out Escobar.
What happened was when Escobar went into prison, he built his own prison down there and he had a 3,000 square foot, prison cell. And so he gets up there and he decides that he's paying them. This is only conjecture from DEA.
Yeah.
That he was paying the Colombian military $3 million a month for protection for a 3-mile perimeter around the establishment. So, and I understand that he stopped paying them, which is on Narcos and some of those places on Netflix that talk about it.
Yeah.
So also the Cali cartel guys found out about the 2 brothers down there.
Yeah.
And they hired David and another guy, Jorge Salcedo.
Uh-huh.
And Salcedo was a high-ranking member of the Colombian military intelligence. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So we made arrangements. We talked back and forth, and Salcedo was with him. Excuse me, I take that back. At the very first meeting we had at the Intercontinental Hotel.
Okay.
And he tells me at that meeting, I work for the Colombian military. I said, I'm telling you right now, if you're not on the up and up, I will know about it, and then this thing is over.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, look, you can do what you want, because back then we had 130 something covert companies around the country, and we all backstopped with each other.
Yeah.
So you could never find out who we were, and we went from one corporation LLC to another.
Right.
And so we got up there, and so I didn't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
And Salcedo was a very cool guy.
Yeah.
And so he starts talking back and forth that under the cover he's working for some other people. Well, it was the Calais guys, which we found out later on.
Yeah.
Became the director of security for them.
Yeah.
And so they actually met me. We called we looked around and stuff like that. We found out that the Illinois National Guard had the Dragonfly still in service.
Uh-huh.
So we brought one down and we told Tompkins that we need money to get the plane here. And so we met him later that night. Couple weeks later, he was actually living in Miami at another informant's house, believe it or not, informant for customs that was telling us what he was telling us. But he wasn't even telling the informant what was going on.
Yeah.
He said, and David would tell me several times, he said, the United States will really thank us for what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And so, but we never acted like we knew what we was talking about.
Right.
So one thing led to another. And so I said, we need money. And so he says, well, let's meet at the donut shop down there by the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami. So I met him over there at the donut shop, and he gave me $25,000 in cash.
Wow.
To bring the plane down here. So, but we're repainting the plane.
Yeah.
It was olive green, and we painted it black, and we took the tail number off.
Yeah.
So we made arrangements for those guys to come down here, and they came back over, and they loved the airplane. Myself and another DEA pilot that used to fly that plane in Vietnam was on site, and so they never trusted him. I don't know what it was, because
they didn't trust the pilot.
They didn't trust the DEA guy. They just, he was too, I don't know what it was, but and he was a good guy.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really go with the flow. He didn't want to go out having drinks and stuff like that. He didn't want to. Nothing to do.
Yeah.
And so which was fine.
Yeah.
But we got up there, and they loved the plane. And so David went out and got on the phone and was calling whoever he was calling, and Salcedo went out and asked him also, because we had the plane there, and we didn't fly it though.
Yeah.
Okay, we said we can't fly it. I said, it's just here to look at.
Yeah.
And so we because the Illinois pilot was still here, and he was going to fly it for us later on for a recognition flight.
Yeah.
So but Salcedo comes up to me, and he says, hey, look, I'll buy all those gun cameras and those those machine guns. I'll buy all that stuff. And so then we went into second contract for not only the sale of the plane, but also for two 500-pound initiator bombs and the gun cameras and all this other stuff, because they want to take pictures of what they're going to do. So I said, okay, no problem. So we got following one, and right around Christmas time, I got a call from a guy in charge of, and so all this was going on in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Okay. Miami had the case, but we were doing everything in Puerto Rico. There was a B-52 place over there, Air Force Base, Aguadilla.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were going to meet him over at Aguadilla, and because we're going to try to get him on U.S. soil, in order to arrest him. But the guys never bought it, and they never got onto it.
Yeah.
And so David, after we get the plane and stuff like that, and we actually did a flyover for him, a few weeks later, and only on video. We never let them be there.
Yeah.
And so the pilot picked it up, and then they took the plane back to Illinois, and they repainted it.
Yeah.
And so we're off and running. So David calls me one night. So he says, hey, look, we are ready to go. We're on all fours, but can you keep the plane for 30 days?
Yeah.
And I said, what? I said, why would I keep this? I said, David, you're messing up the deal. I said, I need my money.
Yeah.
And he says, you never gave us the tail number. I said, I'm not giving you the tail number until I get my money.
Yeah.
Understand that?
Yeah.
And so he says back and forth. So he says, all right, well, they're not ready for us down there. I said, where? He said, they're not ready down in and he said somewhere down in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
I think it was Salvador.
Yeah. And
so he says, they're not ready for us down there. And so this is all right.
How much was the plane going to cost?
The plane was going to be about 1.2 mil.
Wow.
It's just and the bombs are going to be separate. The bombs are going to be about $1 million.
Yeah.
And this was all stuff that he said, we have the money, it's ready to go, and we'll pay for it.
And he was paying you, up until this point, he's paying you in cash.
Yeah, he's paying cash,
Yeah.
because I met him that night at the donut shop, and he gave me hundreds, in a satchel.
Yeah.
And he said, this is just the start of it. He said, I've got full access to their purse strings.
Yeah.
And he said they're very excited about being able to do this. And so a few weeks went by, and I still got and we're still talking back and forth. And if you can believe it, back in those days, I was calling from my home.
Wow.
And calling directly to him at his home. And every time I think about that now, I just get kind of chill bumps about how easy it would be to figure things out, right? But yeah, that's the way it was back then. I mean, that's the way you had to fly with it. So we got up there, and all of a sudden, just before Christmas, I get a call from the guy that's a special agent in charge of the customs office in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And he's an old friend of mine. We knew each other in ATF. He was a former ATF agent. And so he starts telling me about that, you understand that we're going to have to tell the agency about what's going on, because we got a standing up cooperation agreement with them, which I was familiar with because I worked with agency guys all the time when I was with Exodus in Miami.
Yeah.
And I said, look, I won't say what his name was, but I said, look, I would not do this.
Yeah.
I said, these guys are connected. This guy, Salcedo, is connected.
Yeah.
And he goes, no, you don't understand. You don't understand. Well, that Monday morning, everybody's gone.
Yeah.
And I get a text from David, and he says, "Hey, how are you guys doing in Exodus?" And he says, "As I understand, you work for the U.S. Customs Service in the Exodus." And he says, "And that pilot," I said, "Is he DEA or is he And so I mean, everything is just laid out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, but David always never thought I was the guy. And he's trying to tell me to watch my P's and Q's because, people around you are not to be trusted and stuff like that.
Right.
But so the deal went belly up. And what they're trying to do was they wanted the plane to go down when Escobar was still in the prison, and they were going to bomb the prison.
Okay.
Okay. And they had it all set up. And then I found out about 5 months later that Salcedo and Tompkins were both almost arrested at an airstrip, 6,000-foot airstrip. See, we tried to get them up here, up at an airstrip that's close by here where I live.
Yeah.
But these jets don't have brakes.
Yeah.
So you have at least 6,000 foot runway in order for them to stop.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what was the problem? So David did tell me before the thing went belly up. He said they've been building this airstrip down in Salvador somewhere, and it's concrete.
Yeah.
So it's not. He said because we told him we're not going to go second hand on this thing because we want to use this plane again.
So the holdup was building this airstrip.
The whole thing that was building airstrip. And then as I understand the Salvadorian police, I'm not sure exactly what the country was, but there was an article that was in the paper that someone had sent me and said that they had stormed this airstrip, and at the far end of it was David Tompkins and Salcedo, and they got off in a plane, but on the tarmac were two 500-pound initiator bombs.
Wow.
So they're still trying to do it even way back then.
Yeah.
And then as I understand, they caught Salcedo after he left the Colombian military. And DA caught him and actually used him. And he actually got I think it was Fernandez brothers, they're called.
Yeah.
The two brothers that ran the Cali cartel.
Yeah.
And he said, if I get them, I want to be, taken care of. And so he's in a witness protection program to this day.
Yeah. I've heard of him. I've heard of him through DEA people. They said he was a great informant.
Yeah. And I met him first up. And I mean, I had him going. He loved those cameras and he loved those machine guns.
Wow. And David Thompson, what happened with him?
Well, what happened to him was, we put an Interpol warrant on him.
Yeah.
And so it's when I was working, I went to work for after I left Customs, I went to work for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Mm-hmm. I was teaching with counterterrorism mm-hmm. and maritime training. And so I get a call from Miami, and it's a ASA Schlesinger, which I used to work with. And he was a great guy. And he says, hey, look, I just thought to let you know, they just arrested a guy by the name of David Tompkins in El Paso. And I said, it's been 15 years. And he said, yeah, he was trying to go down to South America on business. And he said, so he's in a holding cell right now, but he won't say nothing. Yeah. And so I said, let me talk to him. I said, is he talking? He said, well, he hasn't asked for an attorney, but he's still, we've told him that you're on an Interpol warrant and you ain't going anywhere. Yeah. And so I got on the phone with him. I said, David, you know what this is? And he says, oh man, I know who you are. And he says, can I work a deal? I said, work a deal down there. I said, I'm out of it, buddy. I'm retired. And so he got 6 years in prison. And I think he might have done some work, but he and I always got along. He even started laughing on the phone. Yeah. And he says, no, I never had a problem with you, but that DEA, and expletives deleted.
Yeah, wow. So as soon as you informed the agency, the CIA.
Yeah. The whole thing went belly up.
The whole thing went belly up. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And we're sure that the Colombian military intelligence folks down there got up with the agency people and they said that this is not in our best interest. Yeah. Because it could cause an international incident. You're working for the cartel. Right. And so they just let it out. And then Salcedo went to work for the Fernandez brother. I think that's what they're called. Yeah,
in Cali. Yeah.
But that's who had organized the whole thing the first time. Yeah. Through Tompkins when the helicopter crashed. Yeah. And that's in publication somewhere if you ever want to look it up. Just Google his name and you'll see it.
Okay. What a case.
And he was a good guy. And I never had any problems with David. He was always straight up with me. Yeah. Always told me exactly what he was doing and he trusted me too. So it worked out for him better. And I don't say it worked out good for him. But
Pablo Escobar died in December 1993 in a shootout with members of the Colombian Special Forces. The end of the $7 billion a year Cali cartel, on the other hand, came in 2006 in Miami when its founders, the Orejuela brothers, were both sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. They had been betrayed by the aforementioned Jorge Salcedo, a soft-spoken family man with degrees in mechanical engineering and industrial economics. Salcedo was the Cali cartel's head of security and organized both plots to kill their rival, Pablo Escobar. By the mid-1990s, with the USDEA closing in on them, the Arguella brothers were turning more paranoid and violent. Salcedo, fearing for his own life and those of his family, double-crossed them and sought U.S. protective custody. Thanks to him, the entire Cali cartel leadership was taken down and the Arguella brothers were arrested. What a career you've had, man. What a career.
Yeah, and just another one that real quick to show you that we do work other stuff besides undercover stuff, but we got information about Sarkis Sauganalian.
Oh, yeah.
Sarkis was referred to as a merchant of death.
Yeah.
And he was the international arms dealer. He had a business in Miami at the airport, and he's always been up to his neck in some type of turmoil.
Yeah.
And he worked for the agency for several times. Well, we got word of him that he was doing a bunch of stuff and working with the Bell Helicopter Company, McDonnell Douglas Helicopter Company, and they were trying to export 109 tow attack helicopters to Kuwait. And at that time, Kuwait and Iraq were buddies.
Yeah.
And they actually had a squadron of pilots in Kuwait that were training on the MD-500.
Wow.
And the thing was, there's all types of sanctions on Iraq because of Saddam.
He was the big arms dealer for Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, and so they're prepared to do the whole 9 yards. They did a tech license.
Yeah.
Then they were going to do a demo license, and then they were going to do an export license, and it was all being covered.
Right.
At the highest levels.
Right.
And so, but we caught on to it that all the planes were going to be shipped over there, and then they're going to be flown across the border to Iraq.
Yeah.
And so we got to that and a bunch of other stuff. But to make a long story short, we did convict him, and we indicted 2 other guys from McDonnell Douglas Helicopter Company, but that didn't fly.
Yeah.
And so we ended up arresting him. We convicted him and his son.
Yeah.
And it was called Pan Aviation back in those days. But he was, and it's funny when myself and the U.S. Attorney went up to the CIA at Langley, we went in and these guys are we thought they'd be hush hush and didn't want to talk to us, and because it said, you don't understand, we're not here because we want to be here. We're here because the judge told us to be here.
Right.
To get discovery.
Yeah.
Well, these guys said, look, we want this guy out of our hair.
Yeah.
He said everywhere he goes, he puts up the agency symbol and he says he's working for us.
Yeah.
He said he's haven't worked for us in decades.
Yeah.
And like he seized 2 the civilian version of the was the LC-100 or the C-130.
Mm-hmm.
And they were flying through, he said, through Libyan airspace, and they seized them both.
Yeah.
And he said it was a CIA operation, and the CIA, we had nothing to do with that. And he said it wasn't even international. He said they're in international waters whenever they seized the plane.
Yeah.
And so went up there, and anyhow, they brought in his files, and it was like 3 or 4 feet of files. And we sat there, we looked through all this stuff, and it was all dated.
Yeah.
And we came back and told the judge, he's full of it. He's never been an operative. He said back in the old days, he did a little something. So whenever we arrested him, and we were all sitting there, and we had our tail feathers going, and we said, we got the biggest guy in the arms business, and we got him. A week later, my boss comes in and says, you're not going to believe this. He says, what? The Phoebes have come in, the FBI has come in and taken him out. They're using him.
Oh,
and I
wow.
said, he's going to give him a bunch of garbage.
Yeah.
And so it turns out he gave him a money laundering ring in the Middle East, and he never did a day in jail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now his son did, but he never did a day. It was kind of crazy. But that was a lot of work. That case was a lot of work, a lot of background work.
I bet.
A lot of international travel, because we had to go up and we met with Ali North. We met with Weinsberger.
Uh-huh.
We met with Richard Nixon
Wow.
in New York as Brownstone.
Yeah.
And it was all, we didn't want to do any of those guys. And they were very uncooperative. Like Ali North was not cooperative at all.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he'd been tainted so bad by other press and everything like that. I mean, I'm not sure, but it was a very good case.
Yeah. And all those guys had dealt with Sarkisian at some point.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because it was during the Iran-Contra stuff.
Right.
And Sarkis was right in the middle of that.
Yeah.
And we actually seized a plane, a C-47, going down to Nicaragua full of arms. And then that's whenever the CIA finally figured out they can't get this stuff out unless customs is in on it.
Yeah.
So I was the liaison between us and them if anything was going out. But I also checked to make sure that everything was on the up and up.
Right.
And matter of fact, one time I get a call because I was on leave, personal leave, and I get a call from the port director over at the airport. And he says, "Hey man, you got to come over here. It's 3 o'clock in the morning." I said, "What? Can you wait till tomorrow?" He said, "No, we got 4 guys over here and they're in holding." And I said, "You need to come over here." So I got dressed and went over there. And as I walk into this big room, there's like 200 people in there, all customs people, Metro Dade, everybody else. And so I'm looking around, and so I asked the port director, "What's going on?" I said, "These 4 guys over here have got machine guns, they've got karats, they got C4, they got claymore landmines, and it was all in their hold bags and their carry-ons."
Yeah.
And what happened was they came through customs, through immigration. They had phony passports.
Yeah.
And that's what gave them away. They came in on an LL flight from Israel. And I'll show you how things work in that realm too.
So they had this stuff in their carry-on luggage.
The carry-on back in the old days before everybody even knew.
Wow.
And they didn't catch that. They caught them at the INS station before they even got to customs. And they came in on forged passports.
Wow.
And so these guys look like, stone killers.
Yeah.
They're all big, bulky guys, and the only time they ever wore a suit was to get on the airplane. And solid blue eyes. They're all standing there. They're ready to fight everybody in the room if they had to. So I get together with an agency guy that I knew real well down in Homestead. He said, "Look, this is a debacle." Since first off, I said, "Everybody get out of the room. Everybody out of the room." So it was just myself and the agency guys who were standing there, and my supervisor. And so he said, "Look, put these guys up in a hotel. You sit in the same hotel room with them. I want you in the room with them."
Yeah.
And I said, "What's going on tomorrow?" He says, "They're supposed to meet a plane here at 10 o'clock at Miami Airport." I said, "Well, what's going on?" He says, "I can't tell you." He says, "But, they got to get out of here."
Yeah.
And so the next morning we met them, and they had their parachute bags, had everything in them. Machine guns, and you name it, everything you think of in their carry-on, their whole bags. And so we put them up at the El Staff Hotel, which is that French hotel.
Yeah.
We put them over there. So next morning at 10 o'clock, I took all the property and took it back to the office and secured it.
Yeah.
And so we're going through it. I said, "Look at all this stuff." I said, "I don't even know what this stuff is."
Where did they fly in from?
Well, they flew in from Tel Aviv.
Okay.
And so what happened was, I was asking I was asking the guy with me, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Read the papers in a few weeks. It'll explain everything."
Yeah.
And so these guys take off in a plane. And so about 3 or 4 weeks later in the Miami Herald, I read a thing about where several months ago, the Argentine government had arrested 3 journalists and said that they were spies for Mossad. And sure enough, they were spies for Mossad. They were looking for whoever.
Yeah.
And so what happened was the Israelis knew that they couldn't do anything with it. So what they did was they hired, these were Jordanians. And the Jordanians actually went down there, and I read the paper. 3 or 4 people got killed, and they got all 3 of the journalists out, and they're back on the trip back home. But that just shows you what could happen like that quick.
Yeah.
Just that quick.
Yeah.
And he said that it was a successful mission. He says, "But if it hadn't been for you guys," I said, "You never got off." Well, it said as soon as everybody got out of the room, then we could formulate a plan.
So I'm confused. So who were these guys now?
These guys were Jordanians that were hired by the Israelis. Because Israel and Jordan were still
friends.
Diplomatically, they were still friends, and so the Israelis knew that they couldn't send them down.
They wanted to do a mission in Argentina, but they didn't want their guys to get caught.
That's it. They didn't want anybody knowing about it.
Yeah,
right.
Did you find out what the mission was? Was it was to take out some journalists?
Yeah, they went into a prison and they got these 3 journalists out. And like I said, 2 or 3 people got killed.
Yeah.
According to the article.
Yeah.
And they got everybody out safe, and they went back to Israel, I guess.
Wow.
So that's just what could happen in Miami overnight.
Yeah.
Miami, one of those international cities that just stuff happens.
Yeah. So you never know what's going to show up.
No, you never know.
And then you have to try to unravel the trail of who the people are and who they're working for.
Well, I guess the passports were pretty good, except they were making that changeover that had a little hologram in them.
Yeah.
And these passports didn't have the hologram, and so that alerted INS right away, and they called customs, and then customs. But I was out of town, and so the guy that they dealt with, he didn't know anything about it, so he went over there and they just put a guy against the wall.
Yeah.
And so when I got there, and everything was on the up and up. They had all the proper authorization to be there and to fly back out and everything else like that.
Yeah.
And so and they even had authorization to be carrying all the machine guns and the explosives.
Really?
Yeah, they had license.
No kidding.
The agency got license. Yeah, for all that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
It wasn't legal to carry it in your carry-on luggage, was it?
No.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But back in those days, they tried to get out.
Yeah.
And probably the LL guys went on it too. The airline people.
Yeah, yeah.
They work close with the government.
The man Fred just described is Sarkis Sagagnalian, a Syrian-Lebanese international private arms dealer who gained fame for being, quote, the Cold War's largest arms merchant and the lead seller of firearms and weaponry to the former government of Iraq under Saddam Hussein during the 1980s. Saghagnalian defended the sales when they were later revealed on the eve of the Gulf War in January 1991. His testimony led the U.S. Justice Department to file federal charges against him. He was convicted on 6 counts for possession of armaments and intent to sell to Iraq. 4 years later, in 1995, after he was released, Saghagnalian moved to France and opened offices there and in Amman, Jordan. He died on October 5th, 2011, in Hialeah, Florida.
I'll just end it up by telling you that we used to work a lot with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We used to call them Fish and Nightlife because we used to have some long nights with those guys, both on the job and off the job. But there's this one agent that he and I became very, very good friends, and I'll just call him Agent Terry. And so Terry was he was a former Marine, had been wounded a bunch of times in Vietnam, had half his guts cut out of him, from different wounds.
Yeah.
And if he'd have to go to the bathroom like as soon as he ate. I mean, it was crazy stuff. And he and I really hit it off. And so, but he's telling me some of the undercover stuff that they used to do. But now here's a guy that would go up 500 miles from the nearest town with a whole bunch of poachers that would kill you in a New York minute to get, bear bladders and bear claws and kill anything. And he said, but you're on your own. Yeah, you had to do your own thing.
Yeah.
And they will test you. And getting back to that Green Beret case, I forgot to tell you one thing that they were always telling me is we can get you anytime we want to get you,
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. So one experience was, and I'll get back to the guerrilla story in a minute.
Yeah.
But I do have to tell these 2 instances. One time I'm in the bathroom and I'm putting on my Kel unit, which is, the transmitter.
Yeah.
And so these guys actually opened my door and started walking in, and I got my pants down.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to put my shirt together and pull my pants up so they can't see anything. And I come around the corner, and there's the radio sitting on my bed.
Oh.
And so I'm looking at it. I'm saying, I'm waiting for any time for the squelch to break that these guys are in place.
Yeah.
So I go in and I sit on the radio, and I tell them, come on, let's go. We gotta go. And I said, no. So I'll be done in a minute. I said, I gotta go back into the bathroom. I'm having a problem.
Yeah.
And so the guys left.
Jeez.
That was the first time. Second time is that we're out. We don't really party because these guys say 7:00. If it's 7:02, they're gone.
Yeah.
If you're not there,
Yeah.
they're not on Colombian time. They're not on Cuban time.
Right.
And so we get up there, and all of a sudden I go down the hallway and open up the door, and all of a sudden there's a ping, and that's a very distinctive sound, and it's a little pinger off the hand grenade off of M203. And so all of a sudden I run around the corner to get out, and I come around the corner. Both these guys are standing there, and they're both drunk, and they're saying, "See, you know what's up." So another time I bought a case of Claymore landmines down in Key West, and Keith Anderson and Carlisle are both there.
Yeah.
And so as I'm getting ready to go to bed, I lay my head down and I feel something hard. I lift it up, and it's a Claymore landmine.
Jeez.
And the leg wires are actually in the Claymore.
Oh my God.
And so I go and I follow the lines out, and all of a sudden it goes over to the window, open it up, and both these guys are sitting there drinking Jack Daniels, and they got the clacker, and the wires aren't in it, but the clacker, and there's a little electronic charge that comes out of it, and it goes back in it, and they're laughing like anything. But anyhow.
Oh my God. So crazy sense of humor.
And so, but anyhow, with the gorilla thing, and so Terry tells me this story one time that he's hooked onto these dopers, and they got a bunch of guns in their houses and stuff like that because he's seen them, but they want to buy a lowland gorilla. The dopers love to have exotic animals. All the Mario Tabrawi, that whole big case they had down there, the murder cases, and they all have exotic animals.
Tigers and stuff, yeah. This is in Miami, Fred?
This is in Miami, yes, down in West Miami.
Yeah.
And so they want to buy this lowland gorilla, and so they get up there, and I said, well, how much did it cost? I think it was, they're expensive, like $800,000.
Wow.
So they made arrangements to bring a gorilla down, a real one down for these guys to look at. And they loved it. They wanted to buy it, everything else like that. But they were going to take it down south, probably down to Escobar's farm.
Yeah.
From what I understood. So Terry decides to dress up, and they built a big cage, but it was a wooden box on a C-47.
Mm-hmm.
And so it had these air holes in the side of it. And so Terry dresses up in a gorilla outfit, right? And actually gets inside
because they want to see the gorilla before they buy it.
So he actually gets inside the crate. So we wait, and like I said before, they're on Colombian time, Cuban time.
Yeah.
And so like an hour goes by, so everybody kind of leaves, and there's only a couple of people around. And so also these guys, we didn't realize, but they came through a back gate. And so they went through the gate. And so they come down, and this doper comes in, and he looks in this hole, and he sees Terry in there with that gorilla suit on, and Terry's smoking a cigarette. And so he looks at the doper, and he says, and I won't say exactly what he said. He said, "Hey, you've never seen a gorilla smoke a cigarette before." And the guy jumps up and he's screaming, and he runs out of the plane, and he hits his head on the top of it and knocks himself out. Right? And so they come out, and this time everybody's swarming around and get everybody in handcuffs. Yeah. So these guys are on their hands and knees, or on their knees looking up. Terry comes walking out, and he had long, gray, ugly hair. Yeah. Because he used to motorcycle with the gangs and stuff like that. Yeah. And so he's walking out, and he's smoking a cigarette. Well, the Colombian says, "Hey, man, put that gorilla head back on because you're ugly." And so Terry tells me later on, he gets a call from Joe Leno's people at the Jay Leno show. Yeah. And they're trying to talk him into coming on the show and talking about the case. Yeah. And so Terry asked his boss, and the boss said, no, we're not going to get that experience. Right. And so then he calls him back and says, "No, I can't do it because I'm afraid that, because I do undercover work." He says, no, we want you to wear the gorilla suit.
Nobody will ever see your face.
But they wouldn't let him do it. That's going to make too much of a harassment. Make the Fish and Wildlife people look bad. Right, right. But that was a funny story. A funny story. Terry's house was a sanctuary. And one day he calls me on the phone, and he says, "Hey, can you come up here?" And so he'd have like Bengal tiger cubs, and he'd have leopards, and he'd have exotic birds, macaw parrots.
This is in the South Florida area.
Yeah, this is at Broward County. Okay. He had a farm out in Broward County. Yeah, and so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife used this place as a sanctuary. Yeah, until they could find homes for these places.
Right, because they'd seize these animals, and
they can't go back in the wild, and they find homes for them, stuff like that. So he calls me one day, come up, and a couple months. I'd say back in October or so. So I go up and he says, so I come around the corner, and he's in the swimming pool. Yeah. And so there's like 100 little alligators. Wow. All over, swimming all over the place. All right. Wow. And so he says, "Take a picture of me, take a picture." And so anyhow, so I get ready to take it. He turns around and pulls his shorts down. Yeah. And his butt's there. So I take a picture. So later on, I get a Christmas card from him, and he says, "Hey, so-and-so and I are doing great up here." And in the picture, he says, "But I'm up to my ass in alligators." That's just the type of guy he was. I mean, he always had me going. That's great. He was funny guy.
Wow. So Miami really is, in those days, really was like the Wild West.
Yeah, I mean, you could go outside your house at night. I mean, we had people that moved in across the street from us, and you can always tell when the dopers move in because they tint the windows, they put bars up, they put a couple Rottweilers in the backyard, and that was standard. And so we counted 67 license plates in 30 days that came in and out of it. They always go into the garage. Wow. And then they come back out. And so we just started, I just started calling Metro Dade, just because I knew a lot of guys who were the good guys with the narcotics unit. Yeah. And they started picking them off left and right. Well, Christmas morning, my daughter comes in, and comes up on the side. She's about 2 or 3 years old, and she says, "Daddy, police cars." Yeah. And so I go up to the front, and it's Metro Dade's all over the place. Yeah. Well, right in our swale coming up to our house, there's an orange tarp, and I can see a hand on the other side of it. So what happened was the guy told me that it was a stash house for money. Yeah. And which we knew because we're calling Metro Dade all the time. Yeah. And but the guy got machine gunned because he was stealing money from him. Wow. And they shot him, and he was coming right from my front door. Wow! He knew who I was because it wasn't any joke. Yeah. But that's type of stuff that happened all the time down there. Jeez. And we did all that, and that's why this other guy I'm going to try to turn you on to. He was one of the main guys that did Ozzy Blanco, the female. Yeah. That was as far as main competition for world domination. Yeah. And boy, and she was, because I testified in that trial, the Mario Tabrawi trial. Because we were there the day that they actually got a ATF informant by the name of Larry Nash. We were on one side of the. You couldn't get in close because the guy that we were dealing with was an armorer for the cartel, and he was making machine guns for him. He's converting Mac 10s, Mac 11s. He's making assassination kits in the briefcases that like they did at Dayland. Yeah, and so he got up there and we were just sitting there, and all of a sudden, this big old Cadillac pulls up next to me, and you could tell it's a big barrel-chested guy. And
Yeah.
He had all the garb on and smoking a big cigar, and looks right at me and just kind of smiles. Well, then we went down, and he took a left in toward the Eddie's house, the bad guy's house.
Yeah.
And then there was a tremendous rainstorm, but we could hear that because we told Larry don't ever, and Larry was a good guy.
Yeah.
He just got bringing 5,000 pounds because he was a golf pro from Tampa.
Yeah.
And got by FDLE. And he decided to cooperate, and he had a good hook on these guys down here. But because he was a gringo, they didn't trust him that much either.
Yeah.
And so so when he got over there, he was not supposed to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
And the last thing we heard was, we're going down to 8th Street, and Southwest 8th Street. And about that time, a tremendous rainstorm started. Well, yeah, they ended up catching him, and they tortured him and killed him. We never did find his body.
God.
But that's just how fast things can happen.
Yeah.
But I testified in open court, and I actually got him convicted because I identified the guy, and they're trying to say, what, from your memory? Well, ATF we keep a daily journal back in those days, and everything you do during the day, you write down.
Right.
And I had it all in the journal. I brought it up. It was all right there, what he looked like. His name was Michael Ramirez. He was the main broker for the dope out of, I want to say Tampa. And he had gotten word that Larry was a snitch.
Wow.
And so he got up there, and he has a wife and 3 kids, and just a lovely family.
God. Terrible.
But it just, we always felt bad because we would have. And then later on that afternoon, they're down in the shopping center, and they actually bring his car back, 2 of the guys, and get out of it and run. And they left his car down there at the shopping center, and we never did. And we did warrants all over the place trying to find him, but we never could.
Yeah.
So we felt bad about that.
Yeah, that's terrible. That's terrible. Wow. Well, what a career you've had, man. Wow.
Oh, I've enjoyed it. I don't want to do any of it again. I've had other people trying to say, let's record all this. And this is the first recording I've ever done, Ralph.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
So, but there's a lot more stories. And, I've been in plane crashes. I've been stabbed. You get in shootouts. We went after El Loco, Paco Sepulveda one time. The task force had that he was in town with a couple, and we went over to Key Biscayne, the high rises, and he comes walking out, and he's got his arms under his coat. He's got 2 high-level, hookers with him. And as he drives by, somebody said, "Gun, gun, gun," and they started shooting, and they start shooting, and we're right behind the main car, and they start shooting. And so myself and my partner both go toward the floorboard, and they went down, and the guy went down. Showed you he didn't know where he was, but he had a one-way ticket in and one-way ticket out. I mean, It was, he had money. And so he, instead of going down to Biscayne Boulevard and taking a right, he took a left and went into Bill Bank State Park, and that's where they got him. They got him down there. Yeah. So he ended up testifying against Blanco later on as being one of her main henchmen. And I actually had a case on Aviella. It's called Miyavi. I had a machine gun case. Well, he was her main assassin.
Yeah.
And he killed probably in excess of 100 people.
Wow.
And I still get a notification from Miyavi every once because he's the only guy that's still left in prison.
Yeah.
Everybody else has died. Blanco went back. She was deported back to Colombia and was killed by the method that she initiated up here. It was 2 guys on a motorcycle, and they came up alongside her and shot her coming out of a deli.
Yeah.
And it's just they just one thing after another. It was crazy times back then. People don't even.
Yeah. Crazy. Wow. Well, thanks so much, Fred. This has been fascinating, and what a career you've had.
Yeah, I lived good, and my dad always told me, I kept it for all these years, and that is keep your eyes front and your back clear, and it worked. And I've lived by that slogan my whole life.
Whether staking out crooked Green Berets, pretending to sell exotic animals to drug kingpins, or tracking the notorious Griselda Blanco, known as the Black Widow or Cocaine Godmother, who was involved in much of the drug-related violence that swept Miami during the cocaine wars. Fred Gleffe has seen it all. He's been in plane crashes, and he's been shot at and stabbed and more. His service through his time with Army CID, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, U.S. Customs, and the Department of Homeland Security has been stellar and mostly unheralded. As a friend of his said, and I quote, "He's one of the good guys, and he represents the very best of federal agents." To support that, in 1984, Fred was awarded Federal Agent of the Year. We hope to have him on the podcast again to talk about more of his adventures. For now, we thank Frederick Gleffe for his extraordinary service to our country and name him today's hero behind the headlines.
Heroes Behind Headlines. Executive producer Ralph Pizzullo. Produced and engineered by Mike Dawson. Music provided by Extreme Music. For exclusive content, please join our Patreon group at patreon.com/Heroes Behind Headlines.